Welcome to the Arena Decklist YouTube page. I'm Jerry Thompson. Here with me is Brian Gottlieb, and we finally got some Pioneer bands in today. They made us sweat a little bit, made us wait for it. We are live streaming this on Twitch and then going to be posting it on YouTube later and everything. So thank you, everyone, for stopping by either on Twitch or YouTube. And before the show started, I tried to do a little survey in chat, see how people felt about this B&R announcement, whether they were happy or sad, because obviously there are no complicated feelings here. It's only binary, and it was like 80% happy.
I think so. Yeah, I think it was leaning towards the happy side of things, and I was a little surprised by that. I expected a few more people to maybe have a little salt going, but it's hard to be salty given the terms of engagement for this format. It was very clear that bans were always on the table. And I think there's probably like two branching paths I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the implications of these bans for just play, like what is good now, what gets better, what's dead, what's gone. Some obvious answers there, and I think there's some more subtle ones. And then the other thing I want to talk about is what this means for Pioneer's future as a format. Like
it's dead.
That's false. That is 100% false. And the fact that people were so into this announcement today proves how false that is.
Right.
This format's a slam dunk hit. Everyone loves it. I love it. I know you love it. A lot of fun to be had here. But this is the first kind of alteration to the way things have been going thus far. And things went very well across the first 2 weeks. It's only been 2 weeks that Pioneer has existed. It feels like a little bit longer at this point. But across the first 2 weeks, things went very well, and this is the first kind of bump in the road. We expected this to happen, though. We expected bumps along the way. So why don't we just start with, like...
I got it.
Go ahead.
Okay?
Let me know what you got.
Pioneer's inception, RTR forward, for those who are not aware, fetch lands were banned. The 5 allied color Khans of Tarkir fetch lands. Those are the only thing on the ban list. Announcement came out today. Felidar Guardian is banned. Leyline of Abundance is banned. Oath of Nissa is banned. So the copycat decks were doing very well in the formats. That should surprise 0 people. And maybe the deck that did surprise people was Mono Green Devotion, where Leyline of Abundance into Llanowar Elf or Elvish Mystic allows you to make 4 mana on turn 4. And then there's some wilder applications where you can play like Burning Tree Emissary into Nykthos and just make a whole bunch of mana. And that deck with Walking Ballista and things like Voracious Hydra was
One
actually
for
like, pretty
each
good
band.
against Copycat, which it didn't seem like to me that there was going to be a lot of ways for that deck to actually be good against Copycat. So like the fact that it got to compete against that meant that there was a lot of people playing that archetype, and it also did very well. And yeah, now we have the first things out of the format, I think, that were very much invalidating a lot of different other types of archetypes.
I think that's spot on. All of that tracks for me. And the expectation was there would be a lot of brokenness early on in this format. And honestly, I thought it would be way worse than it has been thus far. I thought we were going to see a lot of turn 2, turn 3 kills. But as far as broken things go, I actually think Leyline of Abundance was the most egregious offender. Just the amount of mana this card was capable of producing in these devotion shells was absolutely laughable, and it had to be checked. It was more powerful than anything else around it, and I think the point about the format warping effects is a really good one, because there were a lot of necessary boxes you had to check for your deck to have any chance of competing, and one of them was early removal. You just had to be able to answer early creatures, and we ran into this. We recorded some Pioneer videos, and we ran into we were testing Pascal Menard's Rug Company deck, and it really couldn't answer a creature on turn 1. There was 0 Wild Slashes or anything like that, and it just felt like you were on the draw. You weren't meaningfully in any games against Green Devotion. You literally had no chance whatsoever.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I would say that about Copycat. You needed some way to interact with the combo, and it didn't have to be Felidar Guardian removal, but something like Wild Slash felt like an absolute pillar of this format for the fact it could interrupt that combo and also answer those early elves. I think now I'm not exactly sure what role red cards are supposed to play in this format. Specifically, Wild Slash has gotten much, much worse. But
has it?
I think so. I mean, this
Nexus,
is...
Nexus did win the first PTQ. And
right.
That deck did not get touched. I would expect the next crop of decks that are going to be somewhat oppressive to likely be things with Dig Through Time and or Treasure Cruise. But Wild Slash actually getting through the fogs and stopping their primary form of defense, I think, is actually going to be huge in the next couple weeks.
Maybe. I felt like the fog decks were mostly going to be preying on the mono green devotion decks. I mean, granted, there's other stuff it can do, but I felt like once the other decks started accounting for that strategy, it would get much worse. And it just felt like the fog deck, which won the PTQ, kind of waltzed through everything. Like nobody was contemplating Wilderness Reclamation in any serious kind of way. And I wanted to see what the adaptations were. But now it's interesting whether it even has a place in the format because you've taken out one of the decks it was designed to prey upon.
All right. Well, you said you had 2 branching paths. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with unpacking things. I want to hear your take on what has gotten better in the aftermath of these changes. Because that's the starting point. What do we play now? I think Mono Green Devotion was the best deck in the format until today. That was my read on the situation. Obviously, things have now changed. And a close second was Felidar Guardian in my eyes. So these were the right bans.
Yes. Well, they were the right decks to go after. Whether they were the right bans, I think, is still kind of up in the air.
Okay. Fair point.
Maybe we can talk about that, but that's mostly semantics, I think.
Yeah, I think that's also part of my next path, but I understand what you're saying.
All right, so we'll cover that at some other point. As I mentioned, these 2 decks were both very good at invalidating certain archetypes, and those archetypes are now significantly stronger as a result of these decks not really being in the format. I think Mono Green Devotion is still going to exist. It's just not going to be as explosive and as combo kill centric as it was before. But the big winners for sure are just any sort of mid-range.
Yeah, so we recorded a bunch of Pioneer videos over the last few days, and one of the decks I played a lot is Sultai. And I think Sultai is very good, very powerful cards. It's a nice look for control very early on in the format. It's in terms of raw power, but this was going to be a pressure point without a doubt. It would have had to do some hard adaptations to Mono Green Devotion, and now some of that pressure is taken off a little bit. Although I will say, there's other big mana in this format, right? Like, there's other ways to do this stuff.
Yes. I think Raging Tilt Monster top 8'd the PTQ with Mono Green Ramp.
Correct.
Hour of Promise, Arboreal Grazer, a couple copies of Golos, some cool colorless lands for Spice, and topping off at Ulamog and Emrakul. And that is exactly the type of strategy that any sort of Thoughtseize deck just doesn't want to play against.
Agreed.
And that deck didn't do particularly well against Copycat because you're mono green. You have some amount of ways to interact. You can play Walking Ballista and things like that, but ultimately your clock is very slow, and how you are trying to take control of the game doesn't necessarily work against them. They did have Ugin too, and obviously Ugin is really good against a bunch of Planeswalker setups, which is kind of what Copycat was leaning on, but they didn't have a lot of good outs to the actual combo. So now it's like, oh, well, we have a little bit of freedom to actually just tap out 4-hour Promise on turn 4 and not really have to worry about anything. Your opponent's going to do some cool stuff, but you can probably go right over the top of them.
This kind of scares me because I think in a lot of ways the pressure points that Felidar Guardian put on the format are good pressure points for a format to have. Like, you want decks to be cognizant of creatures. You want them to not just be able to essentially do modern stuff, like the 2 ships passing in the night stuff. You want them to be forced into interaction because it changes the way every game is played. And now with Felidar Guardian out of the format, I am a little concerned that you can just push a little harder in that direction of ignoring everything your opponent is doing and just building these kind of Rube Goldberg machines and making things larger and larger and larger as time goes on. Yeah. Now, I will say the thing with Felidar Guardian that's bad about it is I hate the thing where you just point at your 2 cards and you just go, I win the game now, right? It's like the Splinter Twin interaction all over again. And I think that's worse than having to actually go through an action. But I've been waffling back and forth on that opinion over the last few days because I think of something like Kethis combo where you're basically dead as soon as those pieces are put together.
Yeah.
But you have to waste 10 minutes, and then it's like the KCI problem as well where you mostly know you're dead.
All that nonsense.
Yeah, so maybe there isn't a little bit of elegance in just pointing at the 2 cards and being like, the game is over now, right?
So watching Todd stream when he got second in that PTQ, he played against Kethis. I think this was in the Swiss, like round 8 or something.
Okay.
And he's just kind of sitting there while Kethis goes off and does its thing. And it's like they have, 4 cards left in their deck and some amount of cards in hand and a bunch of stuff on the battlefield, some mana floating, whatever. And he can't concede even though he thinks he's dead, but then like they mill their last few cards with Diligent Excavator, and he's just like, oh, like how are they gonna kill me? Like they don't have their Jace. Like did they side out their Jace and the Jace was just like in the hand,
Oh.
So it's one of those things where he had to sit there and go through all of this stuff because he didn't know whether or not he was dead. It's not deterministic. And
right.
Yeah, I would much rather have like, card A, card B, put them together, you're dead. I would much rather have those sorts of combos.
Yeah. From a live coverage perspective, it's weird. I think it doesn't translate very well, like just doing the pointing thing, but I get it. Like there is some cleanliness there, and certainly it respects all of our time much more, right? Like we get to do more actions, play more games, watch more Magic, which is certainly good.
Right. Oh, okay. I guess so. Chad is saying that the Jace was actually just in the graveyard and he didn't see it.
Okay.
I was driving and listening to the stream while this was going on, so it was a good solid minutes, like 5 minutes of, Todd just talking to himself.
Nice.
But yeah, Emrakul is the problem, I think, for these ramp decks. Like, you can make a case for, ramping to Ulamog is very good, and that's maybe the type of thing that would shut down Sultai, and, like, that's why it's kind of scary. But I actually think it's Emrakul, and Emrakul has kind of always been this problem. It was a problem in Standard. It was eventually banned in Standard. Granted, there were some Aetherworks Marvel applications and everything, but really, if you're talking about this sort of ramp deck just going over the top of things, you're not setting up virtual kills on turn 3, turn 4 like Devotion was. Maybe it's turn 5, turn 6, but it still dictates the rules of engagement for the format.
Right. No, that's fair. I think those are worse rules of engagement, though. That is my main takeaway.
Yeah.
For where we're at right now. Now, this could all just prove false, and something else could be very good. I know you've been impressed somewhat by, like, mono red decks. I know you've been working a lot on Phoenix, which all of this stuff seems to have promise and went through today absolutely untouched. Yeah, so kind of a weird thing going on where folks who have been working on one branch of decks are very happy, and folks who have been working on another branch of decks are restarting at this point. But such is the nature of early Pioneer, I guess. And I'm sure we'll look back on this time probably with some fondness, as long as we accept the way we're being asked to engage with it.
I'm having fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I even bought Leyline of Abundance yesterday because I thought that this deck maybe showed up like a little bit too late to actually be on their radar, and like maybe the numbers weren't that bad and stuff like that. But, then today the announcement didn't go up right away, and clearly they were probably debating like the last choices, and the Green Devotion stuff probably factored into a lot of that. But yeah, I'm out $9 or whatever.
Same. It's hard not to see what the deck was capable of and be like, I don't know if this is exactly where this format should start. It feels like we've talked about Leyline and Felidar Guardian at length at this point. Obviously, there was a third card banned, and it's Oath of Nissa.
So this hurts Kethis.
It does.
Kethis was maybe pretty scary for the format and has not really gotten a whole lot of attention. There haven't been a lot of people working on it, and only somewhat recently people have started picking it up, like a lot of the SCG grinders and stuff, and then it was putting up some 5.0s, top 4 the PTQ, etc. And I don't think that this is necessarily targeted at them, but it definitely does hurt them. And Kethis is one of the decks that seemed kind of poised to be the new combo deck for the format after these bans, and now it's a little bit weaker, which is good. But I guess I'm going to kind of shift into your second branching path here and talk about, why Oath of Nissa instead of Once Upon a Time.
Okay. Why Oath of Nissa instead of Once Upon a Time?
I'm asking you.
I got nothing. I have absolutely I mean, one of these cards is facially broken, like it is a free spell that does incredible things. The other is a good card for sure, and one that was going to see play in the format. But it feels like this is just avoiding new cards for the sake of keeping them around. And somebody internally loves Once Upon a Time, right? Like that is clear. To make this to make this effect and to like, there's no question this is powerful. There's no question what it does to gameplay. Somebody is a fan of installing more consistency in those early turns into making it so your deck does its thing more often. They think that is beneficial to the play experience and the general player engagement. It feels a little bit more like Hearthstone, where you don't miss your land drop as often and you don't get to complain about those games, and you're squeezing out some variance. And that is obviously a priority in the design of this card because it doesn't do anything else. Like that's what it's designed to do very clearly. And as far as those goals, I understand why you might want to prioritize those goals. And certainly they have done so in the past. Like they do things to minimize variance at some points in time, and they find that favorable. Other times they try and push variance and make it so a worse player has a chance to win more often. Sometimes they try and diversify the opening lines. Here, though, it seems like they're trying to congeal into a certain set play pattern. Make sure you hit your land drops in the early turn. You just have to ask, is that actually beneficial to the player experience? I would mostly argue no, but I think there's people who would argue on the other side, quite frankly.
I would kind of argue no, especially in the context of Green Devotion, and specifically Pioneer, where Leyline of Abundance is kind of messed up when you get to play with 8 Llanowar Elves, right? And obviously having Once Upon a Time to ensure that you have turn 1 Green Source or turn 1 Llanowar Elf helps that along a lot, but I don't mind there being inherent variance to the point where, like, maybe you need to play Sylvan Caryatid as a backup Llanowar Elf, and you don't necessarily have turn 1 Elf every game, you know?
Yeah.
It's just kind of silly, and it puts an inherent pressure on the format to interact on turn 1 with a Wild Slash or Fatal Push to kill the Elf or kill the Monastery Swiftspear, this thing that is, like, super powerful, going to kill you. And especially when there's a lack of 1-mana interaction in all the colors, it really forces you in a specific direction, which I don't necessarily like.
I agree with you. I remember you and I played a game too where you went turn 1 Leyline of Abundance, or turn 1 2 Leyline of Abundance into Once Upon a Time. And it's like, oh my god, how much free stuff are you going to allow this deck to do? Like, it's just crazy what you're able to accomplish without even spending any mana. So obviously you hit your Llanowar Elf at that point, and this might have been the game where I was actually on the draw with the Rug deck, and I was just like, well, I am not meaningfully participating in this game in any sense.
Yeah, and I'm just popping off, no big deal.
Right. So I don't know about Once Upon a Time's long-term health. Certainly Once Upon a Time plus Oath of Nissa is a lot. It's a lot. And then Oath of Nissa also has the other stated reason of allowing decks to easily cast 3-mana Planeswalkers. Now, I think once you squeeze Felidar Guardian, not a big deal.
Yeah, so obviously there is some amount of Kethis involved in that, right. But Kethis doesn't go super deep. Like, Kethis is the card that they end up splashing a lot of the time. They're like base blue-green, and then you're either casting Teferi or Kethis. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly less impactful in Kethis than it is in Felidar or in whatever, like, 4-color Planeswalker deck you want to play. You want to play 4-color Planeswalker mid-range and Pioneer? Like, cool. You should have Oath of Nissa. You deserve it, Right.
Yeah, we'll allow that one to go down.
So, Oath of Nissa being a pip for Nykthos is kind of what makes me think that it got the axe instead of Once Upon a Time, although, like, Once Upon a Time being in print also matters a lot. But it is... Okay, so check this out, right? Felidar versus Saheeli. I posted a tweet a while ago that was like, yo, Felidar got banned the first time. I think we should actually ban Saheeli. There are some people that had some very good counterpoints. But Ian states that Felidar got banned because it is the most likely to break with future or existing cards, right? Mm-hmm. So they're banning Leyline and Oath of Nissa to weaken Green Devotion,
yes,
leaving Nykthos around because they want Nykthos to be able to do cool things with other colors.
Yeah.
But isn't Nykthos more likely to break in the future than Oath of Nissa?
Yep. Yep.
What the hell?
I don't have an answer for you. I think that's like, I think it's working backwards, like backwards reasoning, essentially, trying to get to a justification and not really contemplating the broader message these bands are sending. And it's about just making an excuse for the cards you want in the format. And they see Nykthos as a positive thing in the format. And I agree, if it doesn't push mono green too far, it is interesting. Like it's generally a fun card to play around. Those explosive turns you usually have to work for them. If they're not super reliable, I like Nykthos being in the format. I like the weird like one-off Nykthoses that pop up in mono blue decks occasionally. All that stuff is cool with me. So I don't know. I understand your point of frustration, and you're just a big Felidar Guardian fan. You want to keep that card around. But it did feel like the right band to me here. There's other.
I wouldn't even play with it. I'm thinking about other people. Like, Saheeli is going to see less than 1% of play. Felidar would see, 10x as much play than Saheeli would. Saheeli is not an imprint planeswalker. Sure, Felidar can likely break, but, like, what are the odds of that? And also, you are cognizant of that fact now.
It seems easier to keep Saheeli from breaking than it is to keep Felidar from breaking. Right?
Yes, but I think that that's still very low.
Sure, both are very low. I will concede that point.
And in the context of like, oh, maybe this will break in the future, Nykthos is still legal. You banned cards out of a Nykthos deck and kept Nykthos, so like no matter what, it's not exactly a consistent narrative for like why they're banning the things that they're banning, right?
Sure, I agree with that point. And
That's
maybe we could talk narratives now, because I mentioned I think this discussion is two-pronged. There's the immediate impact on the games being played in Pioneer, and then there is what this means for the long-term health of Pioneer and how this sets up the format for the future and what it means going forward. And all these things leave me very conflicted because, as I said, these feel like good bands. Like I certainly the mono green ban I'm a very big fan of. I think that deck was going to prove to be problematic eventually.
Yeah.
The Felidar Guardian ban, like I said, I think it put some good restraints on the format that I wasn't quite ready to cast off. But on the whole, it's unquestionably one of the best decks. I do question why not just ban it immediately. Like, you knew it was there. You didn't get a whole lot of, like, it didn't win the PTQ, so...
No, but it was 2 of the top 8 and 10 of the top 32, and
it was probably the best deck. So that's fine. We'll let that one slide. Good bands overall. But at some point, you have to ask how you want people engaging with this format. And if you're like buying cards and paper right now, how do you play Pioneer? Like, how do you actually participate in this format? And beyond that, this is obviously a format that people have rallied behind, including a lot of your major tournament organizers. And I think you want that. I think you want that buy-in because it makes your format legitimate and it pushes things forward and it shows this format has a future. And I think getting the immediate buy-in from NRG, which ran a very successful Pioneer event this past weekend, from Star City Games, which intends to run Pioneer, I shouldn't say intends, is running Pioneer as part of the Invitational. Getting that buy-in is a huge show of support for what you are presently attempting to accomplish. They are helping you with your goals. And aren't you kind of fighting them along the way by banning this aggressively? Like, I get wanting to do it.
I don't think so, because they didn't intend for the TOs to pick up Pioneer as rapidly as they did. And
of course, but they made it legal. They gave them the option to. Like, you could have made it a moto-only format.
I mean, you can't really do that, right? Like, you could just run paper Pioneer tournaments if you wanted to.
Right, but I mean sanctionable tournaments. Like, if it's not sanctionable, the SCG Invitational is not going to be a Pioneer tournament.
Right, but you do want people to engage in this format.
Agreed.
But not just, like, you don't want it to be part of the marquee, like, rotating formats like SCG is doing. But a lot of the reason that is happening, and a lot of the reason why people are interested in Pioneer, is because Standard is so bad.
Yeah.
So I think that if Standard were also good and healthy and people were interested in it, like, Pioneer would be proceeding how WotC intended it to, where it's like, yeah, people are playing it on Magic Online. They're PTQing with it. They're playing it in leagues, maybe playing it in side events and stuff. But it's not the thing that people are the most excited in doing. Like you even look at the Magic Online prices and stuff like that. Like a lot of the modern stuff is dropping and the Pioneer stuff is rising. Like Pioneer is basically cannibalizing Modern.
Right.
So I don't think that the explosion of this format was what they had intended, for sure. But there's just like a lot of weird factors in place that are making it so that people, including TOs, are just leaning into Pioneer.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that, and it's interesting to know how it will play out. I mean, what do you think of the state of Pioneer discourse? That's another part of the equation, I think, when you're approaching a format in this fashion. Is there going to be a tendency on the part of the community to just lean into the ban discussion immediately? Like, as soon as a deck does well.
Always.
Okay, so do you think setting things up in this fashion with weekly ban announcements, and like you said, you slept through it all on Twitter today. Twitter was basically a madhouse for about 3 hours between noon and 3 o'clock when this announcement came out. And that will be occurring every single Monday for the foreseeable future, as far as I can tell. Because this isn't like, look, neither of these two decks had taken over the metagame at this point. I can see an argument that they were going to, and it's probably a really good argument. They did seem like the best decks, and especially with mono green, it felt like things were headed in that direction. Maybe there were still moves to make, maybe there were metagame adaptations, but maybe you don't want the metagame to be shaped in that way, and that's defensible. But like I said, these aren't the two best decks, and now when we head into next Monday, are we just fearing for another deck come Monday? Is it whatever did good in the queues this week? Is there another PTQ this weekend? I actually don't know if there's another large event. There's going to be at least the weekly event, the challenge.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how things are going to change. I mean, we have the MC in Richmond this week, and then SCG Con, and I think Richmond is maybe going to take some of the focus off of Pioneer because people just love seeing like the car wreck, you know?
Yeah, to some extent.
I mean, that's kind of why like traffic slows down, right? It's like people are slowing down so they can see the crash and see what happened, and that is kind of what I think people are waiting on Richmond to provide for them. So you can't help yourself, you know? It's like, oh, how bad is it going to be? Is it going to be 30%? Is it going to be 60%? What is it, you know? So I think Pioneer is just going to be kind of in a lull for the next week. I also don't know when the BNR list gets updated on Magic Online, which is going to affect things for sure.
Tomorrow, I think.
Okay. But yeah, after Richmond, there's going to be a lot of discourse for sure. And then after SCG Con, it's just going to be insufferable. Probably like after Friday, I would assume. Where it's like, you know, someone kills someone on turn 2 with Kethis or whatever, and people are just like, ah.
So
it's going to happen.
What do we make of that? Is that the foundation you can build your format upon? Does it matter? I mean, is it only... Here's the thing I keep thinking about. To me, it feels like it matters so much. It feels so impactful. It feels like the constant mode of engaging with Magic cards as what is going to be banned next is a big problem for the game right now.
It's so bad.
Okay, but look, that's you and I, and that's two of the most plugged in people possible who do this for a living, who talk about Magic on a constant basis, who all of our friends talk about Magic on a constant basis, and to us it feels absolutely overwhelming, and it feels creativity stifling, and just presents this horde of negativity around all of these discussions. But that's to us, and I don't know if everyone else feels that.
It's such a waste of time.
Well,
it's useless.
This is true. This is true. And I mean, I think that's one of the big problems is that this discussion is also framed as whining versus grinning it and bearing it. And I don't think it's quite that. It's not about being a whiner. It's about being useful with your behaviors. You can't change anything by discussing the bans. And if you find it something that's interesting, if you find it as a fun way to engage with Magic, great. I mean, that's one of the things about Magic is we all get to engage in our own way. And some people do that with Commander, and some people do it with Limited.
The problem is that this discussion just sucks up so many people.
It does.
Where I don't even
does.
necessarily think that all these people enjoy it, you know?
I don't. I don't enjoy it at all, and I'm constantly roped into. I mean, we're doing it right now, and there's a billion other things I'd rather be talking about. But it.
Well, I wanted to talk about what's good after this.
Well, we've talked about that, and I wanted to touch on this too, and we can go back to that if you want.
Right.
We will talk about all of it, but I do think this is an important conversation to have because it has filled me with some negativity over the past few days. I haven't felt great about the state of Pioneer when I was just loving the format, loving playing the format. I thought the PTQ stuff was really interesting. I think there was a pretty clear best deck coming out of the weekend. I would have been interested to see how things adapted to it. We saw the deck get pretty soundly trounced in the finals when it comes to mono green. I think the Reclamation deck probably has a great matchup, and maybe it's strong against the Felidar Guardian decks as well. I'm not 100% sure on that, but there's a good chance it would have preyed on those decks pretty efficiently as well. So...
Well, they combo and then you just like
fog
them.
Yeah, and if your deck can't beat a fog, it's not a long-term problem. It's a short-term problem that you need to adapt to very quickly. So I wonder if all of this would have shaken out very differently if we just gave it some time, and now we'll never know. And that's a little bit sad to me. I would have liked to see these adaptations. I would have enjoyed seeing what people came up with to challenge Cat Combo, to challenge Mono Green Devotion, and we're not ever going to get to see that.
All right, hold on a sec. I'm going to turn my light on.
Sure. Gerry has left frame.
Does that actually help? I don't know.
That's a little bit better. You're very bright today. Tell you what, you talk for a bit. I'm going to see if I can make you less bright. How does that sound?
Okay, cool. Searsist enjoys the band talk. Searsist is a very special individual.
Some people legitimately love it, and they find it an interesting part of game design, I think.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, if you want to talk about it from an actual game design aspect, it's like, okay, these are the factors that made this card problematic, and knowing what I know now, like perfect information, how would I design this card differently, stuff like that. I think that that's cool, and that's potentially helpful if that is a thing that interests you and the people that you're talking about, or talking to, rather. But when it's just like, you know, this card should be banned, this card should be banned, this card should be banned, like no other context, no other discussion really, you're just talking about like what card is the most messed up, that isn't really helpful unless you are then taking that list of cards that are messed up and legal and you're like, well,
building around them.
Yeah, I should probably put these cards in my deck somehow, you know? But ultimately, you know, for SCGCon in 2 weeks, it is the biggest Pioneer tournament, or, you know, not biggest. The PTQ was the most attended at 400 people, but, like, this has the highest stakes, right?
Right.
And it is, you know, going to be important for whatever success that I hope to have in that tournament, that I actually pick and choose a powerful deck. And I would much rather spend my time figuring out what that deck is rather than talking about what should not be legal, because I have no say in that. So why am I wasting my time discussing a thing that I can't really change?
I heard a theory, and I kind of support this theory. It makes a lot of sense. A lot of content creators, including us, when we were giving the blueprint for how to engage with this format right off the bat, a lot of the discussion was find a card that you think deserves to be banned and prove it. That's how we wanted to approach this format. And now, having made that decree, it seems a little bit, I don't know, two-faced to call people out on talking about bans all the time when that was basically our directive going into this format, right?
No, because there's one thing to be arguing about it, what cards should be banned, and it's another thing to actually like put your nose to the grindstone
and build the decks.
Do some testing, do some work, and do it that way, because that's productive. You are learning things. You are flexing like your deck building, deck tuning muscles for, you know, what is effectively a brand new format too. But just sitting there like, you know, talking at a wall for hours, that accomplishes nothing.
Right. Yeah, I think for my part, it's important for me to just lean into the things I've enjoyed about this format, focus on that, and realize that these bans are going to come every Friday, or not come every Friday, no matter how I feel about it.
Monday?
Every Monday, sorry. And then that'll give us a fun show to do every week. So that'll be nice. We can come back here on Twitch and talk about it over and over. I don't think I'll ever get tired of speculating on how the format will evolve. And then I'll have a new format to play every week. So that sounds pretty great. I think long term, you have to give people a break at some point and let them start to actually engage with your format and start to buy your cards and start to play these tournaments with the comfort to know that whatever they're buying at the time will get at least some use. Like, not everyone wants to spend a bunch of money on cards on a week-to-week basis and never get to use them. You and I accept that in most instances. That's fine for us, but I don't want everyone to have to suffer through that when they can't. And as TOs lean into these tournaments more and more, there's more and more incentive to stabilize this format as quickly as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that is why the BNR announcement was like a little bit more heavy-handed than a lot of us expected, and why it maybe took longer than we expected, because they're like, oh, well, if there are these big tournaments happening, like, we need to actually try and stabilize this thing as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And you can look at it negatively, or you can say, okay, SCG has its huge tournament coming up. They are trying to get this squared away so they have a good product to present at that point in time. Or you could look at it as, oh, this is impossible for SCG players to prepare for. They're burying this format right off the bat. And I think looking at it as the former makes a lot more sense. When you just think about like what their goals are, nobody wants this format to struggle. Everyone involved wants this to be a really good thing. It's just There's different opinions on how to get to that end result. And to me, the important thing is we ultimately get there. However we end up at a fun format where I get to use all these cool cards and enjoy games of Magic when Standard may not be at its best, I'm in for it. It feels really good to me.
Yeah, I'm looking over the challenge deck list now, and Devotion was all over this thing.
Yep.
Decent amount of Copycat, a little bit of Nexus too. So yeah, pretty interesting. I mean, if you're looking for data points, like, you can't just necessarily go off of what people are playing in queues. Like, you need information to actually disseminate too. And Todd streamed his PTQ. They had like 4,500 people watching him towards the end, made it to the finals undefeated up until that point. And then he played against Nexus, which is a deck that, as his mono green deck, like, he just did not prepare for, obviously. Like, you could do things like Splash Blue for counter spells. Like, that's a pretty easy adaptation. But for the most part, he just ran over everyone. A lot of people picked up on that, played it in this challenge. The challenge numbers were probably pretty absurd. And then it's just like, oh, well, maybe we have more work to do, you know? And that's not necessarily going to happen super quickly. But yeah, as these things come up, I would expect a ban to happen like pretty quickly, actually, because we talked about how, you know, maybe people didn't have enough time to adapt to Devotion or adapt to Felidar and stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean, I think this is fine too if you just know that like the top 5 decks are going to get banned before the format's like actually a go.
You do have to think about what those 5 decks add to the mix, though. Like, just getting rid of the best decks doesn't actually accomplish anything, Jerry. Like, if
I understand
Sultai was the best deck, I think getting rid of that deck right off the bat would have been a problem. And after the PTQ, it looked like the best deck, right? It won. It had large penetration into the format. It had lots of powerful cards. And if you had, at that point, cut that deck out of the metagame, I think that would have been a really big mistake.
That would have been bad. I'm simply using the term like best decks to describe the decks that are likely the best decks because they have the most impressive things in them.
Sure. Okay.
And Sultai's numbers are not going to last because they don't have anything like that going on.
Right.
But when you're talking about Copycat and Devotion, maybe something like Nexus with Dig Through Time or Phoenix with Treasure Cruise or Kethis, whatever, like, those decks have problematic things. That is why they're going to be among the best.
Right.
And then, yeah, maybe you can tune a Thoughtseize deck to be able to prey on some of these decks, but certainly not all.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this dance evolves over time. I am excited to do all of this on a weekly basis and debate this constantly, maybe with a little bit more peace and understanding and joy about Magic as opposed to the vitriol that has ripped through the format over the last week.
Yeah. Okay, so Devo, still a thing. Yeah.
Still a thing. Still a thing. It has to prove to me that it's top tier, but Nykthos is a powerful card, and I buy you can still accomplish large mana fairly regularly maybe just not absolutely broken mana. Burning Tree Emissary is a free spell, by the way, and you know how I feel about free spells. So it's probably underappreciated in this format thus far. I think that these devotion looks are the obvious looks. I messed around with a Gruul list a little earlier in the week, and like the free mana coming out of Burning Tree Emissary is a big deal. My friend Dave sent me a list that he had been doing really well. He's very high up on the trophy leaders, maybe even at the top at this point. Just crushing with Gruul and Burning Tree Emissary into Smuggler's Copter, basically. It was really powerful, really consistent. So that's a card that needs more looks in more shells, and it's enough to hold up Mono Green Devotion somewhat on its own, I think.
Yeah. So with Oath of Nissa and Leyline gone, you probably need to add a couple lands and maybe something like Sylvan Caryatid. Just because I think instead of going Elf Leyline, you're going to want to go mana producer on top of Nykthos, and then probably play some more like 3 and 4 drop type of things, just in case you don't have like a super explosive start. You still want to do something with your 4 mana on turn 3. So ultimately, these decks are just going to end up looking a lot more fair and probably pretty similar to the standard list, except you also have like the backdoor, Vivian into Ulamog type of thing.
Right. There's a good chance that gets outmoded, though, by the other big mana decks, just leaning into Hour of Promise and making your mana that way. It could prove to be more efficient. So that's definitely something I would keep a close eye on before I just hop back in with Green Devotion. Test out these other approaches as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Phoenix has been one of the top performing decks that's just kind of been chilling. I think their ability to slow down the Devotion deck was very good, but it was tough to actually close in a reasonable amount of time.
Yep.
So, I don't know. I've been trying to figure out ways to make that deck like a little bit smoother, a little bit more explosive, and might be getting there, kind of coming up a little bit short, but that deck is still definitely very good. Kethis is the other thing I talked about, and then Mono Red, I think, is getting a little bit more metagame penetration, and it's not the Mono Red decks that I would prefer, like going a little bit bigger and being able to play like Rabble Master and Hazoret and Chandra and stuff like that, but I do think that the burn-based ones where you just play everything that deals 3 damage, like all the skewers and whatnot, I think that list is actually going to end up being pretty good, too.
Interesting. I was very impressed by Smuggler's Copter out of the red decks. Persistent source of damage that actually converted those prowess creatures into meaningful damage in the late game. You housed me with an active Oko for many turns. You killed the Oko and still killed me through like 6 points of food life gain in a series we played. So I have faith in those mono red decks to put out huge amounts of damage. And I started to see people picking up Syrian Blood as well in the main deck, which is a card I was pretty high on. And I think that definitely could do some stuff in the format as well. Although having fewer mana dorks floating around, certainly. Not as much to pick on these days. But it still feels like there's enough in almost every deck where Syrian Blood is pretty live in the main deck.
Yeah, if people actually do pick up Sylvan Caryatid, you might want something like Titan Strength, too.
Okay. Yeah, force a little damage through that way. Like it.
And I think that's better than playing like Rimrock or something like that, but we'll see.
Okay.
And then got a lot of people in chat asking about Oko and where does it sit. I mean, obviously it is a problematic card in Standard, but seeing as how Pioneer is kind of shaping up in such a way where they try and, like, the top decks mostly just try and ignore, like, the mid-range soup of what's going on. Oko just, is kind of there. It's hanging out. It does its thing in the applicable matchups. But as far as like Oko against a ramp deck or Oko against Copycat, just it falls short in a lot of spots.
Yeah, it's been good, not great for the most part. I mean, I say that it may still be the best Planeswalker in the format, which is fine, but it feels like it's not a Planeswalker-focused format at the moment. That is the distinction.
Right. So in Standard, Oko kind of defines the rules of engagement because everyone basically has to interact with like, creatures and, play their own creatures, stuff like that. So like Oko is relevant in almost every single game. Whereas games of Pioneer, it's like, well, I'm going to play this Wilderness Reclamation, Dig Through Time and Nexus, or I'm just going to like Treasure Cruise and attack you with Phoenix and then burn you out. Oko isn't necessarily relevant in those game types, but those game types don't exist in Standard. So Oko is still very powerful in Pioneer. It just doesn't matter a lot of the time.
Trudon asking, don't these bans push things to a more mid-range format?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, starting to remove the poles, and we'll have to see how that affects everything. Like I said, though, I think that you can still do these things. There are analogs to both of these decks. When it comes to creature-based combos, there are Kethis. And when it comes to large mana, there's just the Hour of Promise decks, and both those things are still very good decks. And there still might be Green Devotion as well. So it's not like these pillars are gone. They've just been weakened.
Yeah, or they become something else. Marvel is another deck type that has just kind of been lurking in the background, and I still think that people have not found like a great list for it, but I also think that it was just outmoded by Copycat, which is effectively what happened in Standard also.
Right.
And part of the problem with the deck is that you are sort of pigeonholed into playing all of these mediocre energy cards to make your marbles good. But regardless, Emrakul, especially as a format shifts more towards mid-range, is just like the best end game that you can possibly hope for.
Yeah, big trump.
And even if you're playing against something like Nexus, like you get to disrupt them, slow them down a little bit, play Emrakul, and then you just throw all their cards away, you know? Like, Emrakul actually ends up being good against the combo end of things, too.
Yeah, you can always find a use for Emrakul. That's what I always learned to appreciate about the card the more I played with it. There's always something you can do when you get to mind enslaver your opponent. You can find a way out of any situation.
Well, hopefully. I mean, sometimes they just turn over like 3 land and a Reflector Mage, and you're just like, well.
So rare that you can't find a good setup. But you're right, it happens occasionally.
So when you're Emrakuling on like turn 7, turn 8, that happens a lot actually. Like your opponents are just like out of gas. They found ways to use most of their cards, you know. So that's happened to me a decent amount because I've mostly been playing slower Emrakul decks.
Okay. So you get back to that turbo Emrakul style. Make it happen quickly. And then you won't be burdened with ineffectual mind slavers.
Yeah, what else do I got on this list? Let me take a look. The green and red aggro decks, talked about mono red a little bit. You talked about Gruul. I like both of those. I think that they are pretty good checks for things like Phoenix or anything that's trying to be, you know, like on the controlling or mid-range side of things, where these decks have a lot of damage output and lines up pretty well against people trying to Thoughtseize you and play 3 colors with, you know, 10 to 12 shock lands and stuff like that. So they don't really have the tools set up to beat specifically the Gruul deck. I think you can look at the burn decks as they exist now and you're just like, well, sideboard, life goes on, or feed the clan or whatever and just be fine. But Gruul is a different animal.
Persistent large chunks of damage from Gruul, for sure.
Yeah, so my list was Emrakul, Field of the Dead, Green and Red Aggro, Thoughtseize, Kethis, Oko, Phoenix, Nexus.
Thoughtseize, are you including the Sultai decks in that package? Do you think they benefited from this set of bans?
Yeah, I mean, if decks are slowing down, becoming more about interacting, at least for the most part, I mean, you talked about the Hour of Promise ramp decks, obviously. If those become a big part of the metagame, then Sultai kind of stinks, but if everyone else is just back to doing, you know, Phoenix, Kethis type of things, like, hey, your interaction matters now. You can probably actually play the game.
Right. I would also look at Ensoul decks a little bit more. I was actually impressed by most of what I saw out of Ensoul. Again, it just felt a little outmoded. Green went way bigger. Felidar would close the game before they actually ended the game. So if you get a little bit more breathing space there, I could see the Ensoul decks being quite good. And I think those decks are still figuring out exactly how they want to be built at this stage, right down to color choice. There's an argument for like Oko-based versions of the Ensoul decks. There's obviously the blue-red ones that you see pretty regularly at this point. They all feel like they have promise to me.
And blue-red, or blue-white, sorry.
Blue-white.
All the glitters
all
and
that
Soul
glitters.
Artifact, but not Shrapnel Blast. I think those are pretty reasonable. And then you can just play Spire of Industry, Spire Bluff Canal, and play Bomat Courier and activate it.
Yep.
So
Yeah, the mana's nice.
Splash.
Mana's nice for those decks.
Yeah, Spire of Industry's busted.
Yep.
People have just not figured out their correct home yet, and they will.
What do you think? You ready for some questions from the chat now? Did you get all your talking points out of the way?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, hit us up, chat. What you got for us? Happy to take your questions now. Folks asking about Hardened Scales in the chat. We were really high on that deck at first. Not really delivering on its promise, I don't think.
Yeah, good deck, very fair. Stuff like Devotion just went over the top of it. It's like you have some draws where you get to meaningfully interact by having Ballista to pick off their elves and stuff like that, but for the most part, a lot of your cards just don't really do anything. So you're hoping that your setup can actually like go over the top and beat their thing, and that just didn't happen in the case of Devotion.
Yeah, that's the way it played out for me as well. Let's see. I see folks asking about Collected Company. You and I did a video series, bunch of Pioneer games. You head over to our YouTube page. You can see the first of those. It's up now, but we have a couple more coming. I guess maybe only one more at this point because nobody's going to want to watch a bunch of Devotion games. So that one's lost to the annals of time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could just post it and not announce it or whatever, and just have it like live on
Just
the
have
channel,
it
but
be
not
there.
ping anyone.
Yeah, that's fine. We can do that
Might as well.
if people are really interested. But yeah, we played some games with Collected Company. We played Pascal Menard's Rug Collected Company. It seemed to have some flaws against things like Felidar Guardian and Mono Green Devotion specifically. And you could see how this ban also opens up space for those decks as well. They're a little bit more fair, a little bit more breathing room for those decks would be much appreciated.
Yeah, a lot of these questions are like deck specific things. Odds of Treasure Cruise Dig Through Time being broken. I mean, maybe like they're certainly among the best of that type of thing to be doing in the format, and it means that you can't play anything else remotely similar. Spirit's better with mono green gone. I think so. Is Adventurous Impulse an adequate replacement for decks that didn't care about the Planeswalker part of Oath? No, because you're spending a mana, not getting a Devotion pip from it, and you cannot find Planeswalkers with it.
Yeah, I think that card can be acceptable in some contexts, but it's not an analog to Oath of Nissa in any way.
Yeah, Jeskai Ascendancy combo after the bans, that's another solid one that I would look into. But as the format trends a little bit more towards the fair, I think that's when you might see graveyard decks popping up, and then you have more and more of a reason to actually play dedicated graveyard hate like Leyline of the Void, and obviously that makes things worse for them, but like cross that bridge when you get there.
Like Wordy's question, is Nexus the biggest play pattern offender in the format? Because I think Felidar Guardian's ban has a lot to do with the play pattern setup. And is Nexus the next one that really has a target on its head for just being a little bit unfun to play with?
Nah, Kethis.
Okay.
Kethis is worse. You just end up taking way more game actions, I think.
Okay, just due to the time problem, like the KCI problem, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Samp asking about Dread Horde Arcanist. You know I want that card to be good. I want to work on it. I think
I've been working on it.
Casting a bunch of Thoughtseize sounds pretty good to me. There's certainly powerful 1-mana spells, and there's a lot of good ways to make Dread Horde Arcanist larger as well. There's also like the fact that it crews a Copter very well, and Copter puts fodder into the graveyard for Arcanist. I think that synergy's a little unexplored. It all sounds very fair, but worth looking at for sure.
Dude, I don't want to crew a Copter with Dread Horde Arcanist. Come on now.
Dude, for the first time when you don't have anything to cast in your graveyard, you're happy to do it.
Well, I feel like I just messed up at that point.
Yeah, you probably should have cast the Thoughtseize on turn 1, right?
Yeah, probably. How big of a hit is Oath for Kethis? I mean, it is. It is a hit for sure, but you know, they're still doing their thing. A lot of the lists didn't play Once Upon a Time and now can. I know that Abe's list had both, right?
Mm-hmm. There's still incredibly powerful cards in that deck. Emery, Mox Amber.
But yeah, it's still going to be a deck. It's still going to survive. It's just like slightly less consistent, maybe slightly higher mana curve. You don't have as many legendary things in your graveyard to actually exile, stuff like that. But like, I don't know, slows it down by half a turn maybe.
People asking about Electrostatic Pummeler. I know that's one you actually love, Jerry.
Yeah, I got to try that out. I think that deck's actually good. I mean, it gets worse the more the format trends mid-range for sure, but it could be good. Do you ever see Thoughtseize getting banned? Unlikely.
I think Thoughtseize is good for this format. Like, people were very upset last time Thoughtseize wasn't standard. I didn't hate it that much. I get that it can be frustrating to play against, but I thought there it was fine-ish. And in this format, I actually think it's an actively good thing to have present.
Decks, at least some decks in the format, need ways to interact for 1 mana, and maybe Thoughtseize is over the bar for what you would want.
But everything else is so much worse, right?
It is. Yeah. It really is. Like, Thoughtseize is far and away the best one, right? It's not even particularly close, but you do want something like that. I think it would be, you know, more fair if it were in line with, like, Inquisition of Kozilek, something like that. But it just kind of is what it is. Hopefully hopefully Pioneer means that, like red will get some good 1-mana interaction, blue will get some good 2-mana interaction, and we can kind of like even things out a little bit more.
Right. Yo-Man asking about Field plus Splendid Reclamation. You done any work with Splendid Reclamation? I'm not even sure if I remember what that does.
A little bit.
All lands from your graveyard come back to the battlefield?
Yeah, so Will Urker, 5-0'd a league, posted that league on YouTube. A lot of people picked up his deck after that. They were 5-0ing with it. I think Will kind of knocked it out of the park with his first version. It was a little rough. And the things that people have been trying to do, yeah, Eric's MTG in the chat, what's up, man? The things that people have been trying to do, the deck have mostly made it worse.
Okay.
They're like cutting Dig for Cruise, cutting Magmatic Insight, because they're like, oh, this card's not good, whatever. No, just play more lands. Like, 28 land is just not enough. That's it. Magmatic Insight is one of your best cards. Continue playing that card.
Nice. That sounds exciting.
But yeah, you basically pieces of the puzzle to find the reclamation, put lands in your graveyard, you Splendid Rec, go up to 7, 8, 9 lands, whatever, and then you just kind of bury your opponent from there. It's great.
Talking my language right now. I love it. Especially if things are getting more fair. This sounds like a real crushing approach.
Yeah, I mean, we're already talking about Hour of Promise into Ulamog and stuff, and this deck has a lot of those capabilities where you have Growth Spiral, pieces to find, Hour of Promise, you are forcing people to interact with your graveyard with Splendid Reclamation, and then you're also just a couple turns faster than the other ramp decks, so you kind of have the edge there.
Right. See people asking about control. Any control that you've seen thus far that you're a fan of? Sultai I would classify as control, quite frankly, but I think they're talking more traditional counter spells, that kind of stuff.
Sultai is mid-range. They need a good 2-mana counterspell. Quench is not it. If you look at the last few leagues, you'll see a lot of control decks, like various flavors, different color combinations, different card choices and plans. You know, you see like some Approach of the Second Sun, some Dragon stuff, some Dimir, some Torrential Gearhulk, some Grixis, etc. You have a lot of options. They're mostly viable, but they definitely need help because they are on the weaker end as far as like things that you can be doing in the format.
Okay.
Satyr, Wayfinder, Dig Through Time worth exploring? Obviously. Always.
Yeah, the Delve spells feel like they're not quite getting their due yet. I think your Phoenix lists in particular, Jerry, have done a good job maximizing Treasure Cruise, which I don't think some of the other lists do to the same extent. And that's when that card really starts to feel insane to me, is when you're just pushing all your resources into it, making sure you're chaining through those spells regularly. And maybe we can get to a place where we can do like 4 Treasure Cruise to Dig Through Time because you're generating that much velocity and just able to cast those spells so reliably. Has
Glory Bringer been an underplayed card? Yeah, absolutely. Is Drown in the Lock the best counterspell? Sort of. It is against a lot of strategies, but then when they cast Dig Through Time with it and they're like playing around your Drown, it's really bad. It's very hit or miss. I don't think you can just main deck 4 copies and be fine with it because it's going to be dead so much of the time.
Blue-Green Eldrazi, folks asking about. Any interest in that list?
It's solid. It's fine. I would rather Gruul, I think.
Okay.
What else we got?
Knights and Humans. Can it compete as a good aggro deck? Haven't seen any lists that have impressed me out of either of those tribes thus far.
No, that's one of those decks where you go through Scryfall looking at all the various cards and you're like, well, I put all the playable ones in my deck and yeah, it's kind of playable, you know, but every other deck in the format is like 80 cards, and then you have to cut some just very, very good cards, and then you're like, wow, this 60 is busted, you know? And then the white aggro decks are like playing Mardu Woe Reaper.
Right, I've seen my share of Mardu Woe Reapers, and usually beaten them pretty wholehandedly.
Yeah, so it'll get there. I mean, that's one of those decks where there are obviously going to be new prints in every set, and Collected Company is still there. The mana's kind of viable for multiple different colors. Like, the format is very, I don't know, it works very well with decks that want mana untapped on turn 1. Like, you have the fast lands and the pain lands and stuff like that. So, like, it should benefit aggro if you want to play, like, a 2 or 3 color aggro deck. But they just don't have the right collection of cards on the curve that they need to actually succeed.
Sure. Questions coming in fast and furious now. Struggling to read one before it scrolls off my screen. Good build of mono black devotion. Vampires like Clyde or with card draw. I don't know. Clyde's been doing pretty well with that list.
Yeah, and some other people have been picking it up too. I think that deck's fine. Again, his deck specifically is weird because he's trying to make Sorin a thing, and Sorin Champion of Dusk is obviously very good, but you look at the other mono black devotion decks and they have a lot more power along their curve, so it's difficult to say like which one is actually better. But when in doubt, I would go by the person who has what looks like an 80% win rate with their deck, you know?
Right. I just almost lost it because oh no we lost just said, do we predict any unbans? Like we think they'll change their mind next week about these 3 bans, or fetch lands are coming back? I don't know. No, I don't predict any unbans right now.
No.
Seems unlikely.
I get that it's a trolley question and it's kind of clever. I like it, but
seems unlikely.
That's it. You get a small smirk out of me. That's all you get.
Plasia wants to know when we're getting another 3-hour Q&A podcast. It has been a long time since we did that. I'm not sure if my vocal cords have ever recovered.
Yeah, I don't know. We could do that. Do people actually have questions for us? I mean, we have the AMA channels up in our Discord, and they don't get a ton of use. So
very true. If there's enough demand, we'll do about anything. If you all ask for it enough, we will always hop on board. But I haven't seen people clamoring for that 3-hour cast again.
Nah, and Magic has enough stuff going on. Like, people normally do those during the down weeks, and
when was the last time we had a down week? I can't even remember what that feels like.
It's like, oh, what do we do this week? I guess we could talk about Legacy. Nope, that hasn't happened in a while.
It's been ages since we had any downtime. It feels like things have been happening fast and furious for sure.
First Eldraine card to be banned in any format. Oko.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, okay.
One of the two.
Yeah. No, I'm leaning on yours, actually. I think they will ban Once Upon a Time in some older format before they would ban Oko in Standard. So.
Makes sense.
But yeah, if we could get the Hearthstone nerfs on those cards, I'd be interested.
Sears bemoaning the loss of fandom. You and me both. My bank account's hurting now that fandom's gone. You got to bring that back. All right, we'll answer this question one time and then never talk about it again. Sears wants to know, you don't think Oko will be gone on the 18th, Jerry?
I don't know.
I think no.
It's seriously yes or no, and I'm like 50-50 believing either one. It seems unlikely just because it's in print Mythic. That's $1 million roughly. That makes me lean no, but who cares?
That is the biggest takeaway.
That's the thing, is like this weekend I bought more Okos because they were so cheap. And they are going to see play in older formats, so they're going to retain their value and eventually go up. Like, if you want to buy Okos for $30, I think that's like a fine investment, you know?
Yeah, long term you expect that to hold its value pretty well.
And if it doesn't get banned, well, cool. They go up again.
Sounds good to me. Okay, I think that about does it for our Pioneer ban reaction show. Unless you have anything else you'd like to throw in on the way out, Gerald?
No, I'm good. This week we are both traveling to Richmond. I'm playing in the MC. You're playing in the Grand Prix. We have some content queued up for YouTube for the rest of the week, so that'll be cool. And then I'm kind of chilling in between Richmond and SCG Con, and we'll probably do some Pioneer content on Star City, and we'll obviously be thinking about that format as soon as I drop from the PT.
As soon as you're freed from your responsibilities. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Definitely more Pioneer stuff coming down the pipeline. Probably not returning to Arena anytime soon if I can avoid it. Definitely come say hi in Richmond Busy Hands.
Yes.
We will both be happy to say hello. Hope we see lots of you there at the tournament. It sounds like just about everyone's going to be there, so it should be a lot of fun. And we will wrap up our standard requirements, I'm probably going to play some modern PTQs. I'm going to bring down... I will bring Amulet with me. I will probably play Urza, though, in most of the PTQs. I think that's just pretty clearly the best deck right now. Tweaking that a little bit and getting good builds of that together. But there's like 12 formats to prepare for, and I have the Legacy Premier League that also has got me playing Legacy still, so I'm just underprepared in absolutely everything at this point. So
put a Cephalid Coliseum in your deck.
Talk to Jarvis. That's you gotta beef with him. We'll get a Cephalid Coliseum into the deck at some point. Although I'm not even convinced that's right. Why is that better than Waterlogged Grove?
Because 3 cards is more than 1.
But you discard 3 cards.
Okay. Have you ever cast Brainstorm before?
I have occasionally cast a Brainstorm.
And you have an active Renin 6, so you have plenty of lands to filter through? Are you kidding me?
I guess that is true. You are getting more lands.
Why is Brainstorm better than Ops? Because it's ancestral, not Reach Through Mist.
Do you like green mana? That's got to factor into the equation too, right?
So that land is your 19th land, right?
I don't even know my list well enough to tell you there's my 19th land.
It doesn't matter. Rug has operated fine off of 18.
Mm-hmm.
Not enough has dramatically changed. The 19th land is basically just to go with Renin 6, so yeah, you're getting an additional green source, but you don't need it.
Okay. Well, if I ever play that deck again, I will be sure to register up a Cephalid Coliseum, because I don't want to think about it, and it's easier for me to just go okay and not give it any more thought. So here we go. Get ready for that.
Most underplayed card in Legacy right now.
Interesting
My
call.
hot take. All right, sign us out. We done.
That's game.